Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel today with some incredible generative AI founders. I'm excited to kind of deep dive into their solutions, what problems they've solved, and kind of how they kind of see this market going forward. So I think just kind of to give our audience just some general background about everyone and the products they're working on, I think let's just give a 30-second name and intro of what you're building. So Leisha, why don't we start with you?
All right. So I'm Leisha. I'm the founder and CEO of Rosebud AI. We are building the AI Roblox. So what that particularly means is in the same way that Roblox made it very easy to create and enjoy games with a community of users, we're taking AI very seriously. Generative models in particular for both asset generation and the actual code generation to make a platform for people who want to make games and enjoy them.
Awesome. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Paul. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Arize, and we're building an AI coding assistant that helps developers build 10 times faster. We launched about a month ago, and we have over 100,000 users who are using the product on a daily basis. And the thing we do differently is we are building AI that understands the developer's context and their code base. So instead of asking, how do I do something? Developers can ask and get immediate answers to, how do I do something in my context? So it feels very personalized.
Awesome. We'll definitely dive into those growth numbers later. And lastly, Peter, yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Peter, the founder of PromptLoop. We help sales, research, and marketing teams use AI models in spreadsheets. So we let you use LLMs and custom LLMs, fine-tuned LLMs in a simple spreadsheet function. Been live for about 5 months and look forward to diving into some of the exciting things we're seeing users build.
Awesome. And yeah, just myself, I'm Michael. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cerebrium. We're a machine learning platform that makes it easy to fine-tune and deploy machine learning models to serverless GPUs and CPUs. But I think just jumping straight in, I think obviously all of us have kind of seen the hype that this industry is kind of going through at the moment with everything that OpenAI and Stability AI and other players have kind of been doing. I think one thing is most of our kind of watchers are looking at how to implement this, have definitely experimented with ChatGPT in some way. I think, Peter, starting with you, how should companies approach implementing these solutions actually into their product? One thing that I've definitely seen is that some of them are just doing it for a vanity or marketing trick, but users aren't actually seeing that much value. In some instances, whereas others are seeing much more value created in their product. How have you guys kind of gone about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know we're not getting into acquisition and learning and getting close to our users yet, but we have folks really at different ends of the use spectrum, if you will. A lot, I think, especially after the ChatGPT launch, of folks went out looking for tools that they maybe wanted to try 10 tools a day, try it once, move on, and go their way. And then we have folks who have a mission critical workflow. In our case, it's NLP models in Sheet, so a research team that depends on quality of output for their business to succeed, really relies on this and wants to get very close to the technology that's there, whether it's us or another solution. We sit inside Excel and Google Sheets right now, so we effectively integrate with where they're comfortable with and try not to add any more complexity or software overhead that we can. So I think a lot of it is about understanding how far along companies are in understanding where they can use these tools appropriately without having to reinvent their business. I think in 2-3 years, we're going to see a lot of completely new orgs and businesses and use cases. But right now, there's a lot of activities that were below the threshold of hiring an in-house AI team that now a lot of folks like ourselves can come and service from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, Paul, talking about that experimentation that Peter just mentioned, I mean, you guys, like you said, you've been live for, I think you said a month and grown to 100,000 users. How did you guys kind of go from concept to that type of growth? How did you kind of release this product and what was your approach to get there?
Yeah, the last month has been, it felt like a year, just given how much has happened over that short span of time. For us, we kind of, I think, wandered our way into this kind of hyper growth. We actually launched the product in stealth and tried to remain stealth because we wanted to work with a close group of users. But it kind of started off with some users making YouTube videos about our product. And we're kind of this mysterious tool that was already available. At the same time, there was a lot of hype around Copilot X. That's when they announced some of the new features they're coming up with. And we actually already had some of the features that they're building. So I think the combination of those factors really created that hyper growth for the last month.
Awesome. And Lisha, I mean, you're the one kind of more on the kind of image generative side of things. What have kind of been the struggles that you've kind of seen? I mean, obviously, image models are definitely kind of a new, at least newer than like kind of text generation models. And so how are you guys dealing with the struggles of implementing these productions, kind of making sure that the output is what users are expecting, the quality of that output? How have you guys done at Rosebud?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. So yeah, the image generation is a feature in what we're building. I would say that we're aiming to do more of the game development, pipeline, which does include code generation. Because I mean, back to the question, like image generation is very low barriers to entry right now. I think you can still do a very good job by specializing. And so in our case, we're pretty early in the space, released a bunch of viral consumer apps several years ago that, just organically grew to millions of users. In that case, it was because the tech was both not ready for very kind of specific production use cases, but very fun for casual creators. And so we wanted to experiment with consumer users in that case. And in that case, it was not that you had to like refine the outputs very much. You just had to delight users in terms of surprising them for like what they can create. So for instance, one of our apps, you were able to like animate photos from just like a few clicks. So you had to create a pretty intuitive interface so they had a very good first experience, but also give users a feeling of control. From that, we, had learnings about just like actually scaling up infrastructure. I mean, there was nothing around at the time. So not only do we have to like fine tune or train our own models, but actually, scale it up in the cloud. There's no service that provided that. You had to build that in-house. I think that was also not only useful from an engineering perspective, but a really good experience in kind of figuring out what is it that's actually, I guess, interesting in a retentive way for creators. I mean, I think at this point, because there's such low barriers to entry on the image side, it's much more important to kind of figure out what in the creation pipeline do you want to tackle. And so for us, it's gaming. We had a subset of users even back a few years ago who used it for concepting game characters, and it made us very interested in that entire pipeline. But with the success of generative, it's not just image generation. It's a lot of the like pronounced improvements in large language models, especially for code generation. So for games, that's a natural extension of the pipeline that we're building up.
And I mean, you mentioned like the kind of struggles that you guys face when implementing this, in the beginning. And I kind of saw that you guys have been going at it for probably a lot longer than most people have. And so the insights that you have must be kind of a lot more experienced. So what do you think are some of the unexpected struggles that you didn't expect? I think, people already know that scaling something like this up with, GPU power required is a struggle they already anticipated. But what are some of more of the unanticipated struggles that you guys went through that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, but the one that just jumps to mind now is it's so interesting how the branding around synthetic media has changed. I think back a few years ago, people called it synthetic media. Now it's, generative AI. But especially since, in the beginning, we're trying to leverage models where they were incredibly, I guess, like impressive to people. So that did amount to like creating people's faces. And a lot of it was like, for instance, used for like people were thinking, this might be useful for generating, AI models, like not the models of, architecture models, but like human models. And what was interesting there is like, obviously there was like a huge, like kind of like backlash. Is this replacing human jobs? Like you can't just use models for, say, fake diversity. But then there's actually business owners who are like, well, this is great. We can actually like, do things faster with this. So there's a lot of controversy there. And I think now what's interesting is because it's so prevalent, because there's such a hype around it, and also because the quality is so good, it is really a productivity boost. I think there's just like a phase transition in the acceptance of just, synthetic media. So it's very interesting to kind of observe, people's acceptance of that in the broader culture.
Yeah. And Lisha just mentioned how, some people might feel threatened by these models. But what I find interesting is, and what you guys are doing at Easy Code is software developers and machine learning engineers who are the ones kind of behind this push. They're the ones who are loving it probably the most and don't feel threatened at all. Like, why do you think that is?
Well, I think for one, you have to look at the theoretical problems that AI can solve and the real problems that it can solve. And from what we're seeing from usage patterns, there's a lot of problems that developers face on a daily basis. And I think as soon as you're focusing on those real problems and making people's lives easier and more productive, it's a positive experience for a developer to be using AI tools. I think for anyone who's tried ChatGPT, it feels like a helpful assistant. And I think that's a very important narrative. But I do want to touch upon I think there could also be a false sense of kind of extreme trust and comfort around security and safety, but also just, the concept of replacing jobs. I do see a future where AI will be replacing jobs if it's not already happening. So I think as founders, as investors, and as a society, we should be having conversations around, how do we responsibly use AI in a way that benefits society as a whole? And I think the blind focus on productivity could lead to some unexpected outcomes if not dealt with carefully.
100%. I think everyone's kind of aware of the AI safety call that some of these famous machine learning engineers and researchers called for, and they wanted this AI pause for 6 months. And Peter, you're kind of, what you're working at Prompt Loop is clearly sensitive data. It's financial, spreadsheets, financial data, which some companies might find that's pretty sensitive, and they don't want to send that to some sort of third party to process. How are you finding clients react to that in terms of when it comes to personal, like the sensitive data, and not wanting to interact with something like OpenAI to do that?
Yeah, no, that's something that's top of mind, I think, for companies big and small, and something we talk about and hear about a lot and focus on. The way we designed Prompt Loop, basically, like the infrastructure sits only really in the cell by cell operations where you're using it. So it's segmented, which reduces friction. Like, we're not able to look up information across your whole document or even across your whole spreadsheet, but we do that in a way to give folks the certainty that this is something that's used when you need it, and not touching data that it doesn't need to. So that's important in terms of like deploying and developing specific solutions for customers. That's also something we talk to folks about, especially as we get to do bigger companies and more specific use cases. For the most part, there's still an appetite and openness to use an OpenAI or an Azure API, I think, in a lot of cases, but that's changing, especially as the open source models improve. To echo on earlier points, I think it's been interesting to see the user appetite arc change in the past 6-7 months. Obviously the technology is hugely advanced, but almost as interesting is how folks, our customers aren't in San Francisco for the most part, right? They're in cities where maybe this isn't what is talked about at the coffee shops all day long, but the questions folks ask, even the way they use our tool has hugely evolved since, say, October to today, which we're adapting for. A lot of it's good because it's more familiarity, comfortability with the tools. But there's other mind shifts that have been interesting, where sometimes you do want more of a binary response, less of a chat response where you're going to get an answer no matter what you ask.
So basically, just to summarize what you're saying is CEOs and other prospects now answer your cold emails because of the state of the technology. But
Lisha,
kind of going on what Peter said is, he was talking about how security is top of mind, and you just mentioned how you guys at Rosebud are kind of doing code generation as well. And typically, I'm sure, Paul, you have something to add on this as well, is companies don't want to give third parties access to their code. And so obviously, but you want to fine tune a model on a company's data to obviously perform better. How are you guys kind of dealing with that? Are you going in companies' clouds? Are you finding companies implement this internally and take on that project because there's lower barriers to entry? What are you kind of seeing from your side?
On my side, well, I mean, we're not going B2B. We're mainly targeted towards indie developers. And so that's less of an issue. And the reason we're not going B2B in terms of like larger studios is it's interesting. There's a lot of interest. I mean, gaming is like one of the most, I think, obviously technologically like forward-looking industries. Very, very also just like technical in general. Everyone who works in it. But despite that, they have very kind of just already developed processes for creating games. And so I think given that there's such a platform shift right now where the technology is improving rapidly, you want to work with people who are going to be able to move faster. And so I think there's a bigger opportunity to work with indie devs. And so there's less of an issue there on security for us.
Yeah, that's quite nice. Paul, I'm sure you have something to comment on that. I mean, are you going B2B as well? Or you're only going B2C?
I think Alicia's spot on in that. For startups, if you want to iterate quickly, you want to move with users who want to iterate quickly with you. So our main focus right now is B2C, but also we have some customers. Most of our paying customers are small businesses. So it could be a freelancer or IT shop with a couple of engineers. Depending on kind of the stage of the company, their security needs are different. We've had conversations with very large enterprise. Their security concerns are just on a different scale. It's not even about sharing access to their code base, but they're afraid of being sued if the AI generated code that was trained on somebody else's code base. And then there's also security concern around the accuracy and potential bugs in AI-generated code. So that's a different bucket of concern. I think for most small businesses, it's like, do I want to share my code base with this AI model and train this AI that would know my code base? And that just, I think, comes down to what's more important. Is security more important, or is moving fast important? We do a set of things that help users mitigate the risks. For example, a lot of the things are done locally. We also minimize any kind of role that our servers play within the whole pipeline. So we want to mitigate their exposure. But overall, it's kind of different companies have different risk profiles when it comes to security.
I think we're seeing the exact same thing at Cerebrium, Lisa, what you mentioned, where we're probably getting 50% of our most valuable feedback that we iterate on for our product from like indie devs, kind of one-man, two-man teams. But unfortunately, they don't pay us a lot of money. That it's typically the C and plus kind of companies that actually pay the bills for us. And I think, Peter, coming to you, what Lisa mentioned also about how these models are so much more accessible to all these companies and how all of us are targeting kind of these smaller startups. They're obviously all trying to move fast, but they're all using kind of OpenAI to start that experimentation journey. And then from there, they're kind of using open source models. How are companies supposed to kind of generate some sort of moat? Is it just in other traditional methods in terms of like community, product experience, or are there any other ways that they can kind of create a moat around their product?
Yeah. I mean, obviously something we think about a lot. I think the importance, which maybe isn't all that new, is thinking about basically how close and how well do you understand like whatever the problem set and the customer is. The fact that folks are all using transformer technology, maybe they're all using the base model. Hopefully it's fine-tuned to a specific use case. That technology itself might not be differentiated, but like how you're delivering it to customers and basically what your relationship is with those businesses. Are you their way to get the OpenAI model for their regular business as usual, or are you the platform they're going to turn to when they need to go to the next step on whatever their particular task is, which is where obviously we and other companies are trying to put themselves. So I think it is heavily on not only the experience, but like the way you're positioning the product for what the customer wants to do and what customers you're going after. Privacy and ability to accommodate that is certainly one piece of that. Learning and ability to guide customers to a point where they're familiar with an interface where they could go elsewhere, not too much differently than if you're building vertical SaaS, you and your competitors might both be using React under the hood, but you're going to have probably tremendously different business models based on how you go to market, what you're providing from an end-to-end experience, and then how well you manage community and the other things you said.
Correct. And I mean, I think the one thing that I've also seen is just like any other startup, distribution has been king. Companies that have had great marketing tactics, have kind of caught on the hype train, and kind of put their targeting and messaging across correctly, have really just benefited from the current growth in the market. Lisha, I saw from your profile that you're, previously in venture capital. Coming from your experience, how do you think like VCs are looking at these companies who are differentiated? And I think another part of that question is when OpenAI released plugins, I think that killed a bunch of startups as well. Where do you kind of think companies should focus their time on? How are VCs kind of looking at this space? What are they looking for that's unique?
I mean, I think I wouldn't speak for all VCs, and also since probably they're learning from the entrepreneurs at this point, because it's a new game for everyone in some sense. I mean, to Peter's point, it's like a lot of it is still the same, like build a good business and know your customers, and like just even if you're using React versus Transformers, whatever. But there is one thing that's like really changed, which is like because the barriers of entry have reduced for a lot of kind of, creating a lot of stuff. You'll see companies that have grown the fastest in the history of like all SaaS companies, but you also see that like, because there's no barriers to entry, other incumbents or not other competitors also jump in. And so that's why I think it's like so hard to just have, a blanket statement about what's the right thing to do. I think for us, what's really interesting, so I can, speak in more detail about building moat, is why it's so key to verticalize is, on the fine tuning point, you have to own the user actions. So for us, it became much less interesting to stay in image generation because it really, for most things, amounted to a feature rather than the full product. If you're creating game assets, like you don't really own fully the user actions for creating a game. It's not going to be as good as that. And when you own those user actions, you can fine tune. You can use RLHF. Obviously not on the models that are closed source, but I imagine people who are providing foundation models will also give fine-tuning endpoints to those soon as well.
Correct. And I mean, you mentioned, about how everyone's just learning from this space. Paul, how are you guys kind of hiring for skills in this space? Is it just anyone that's got experience with ML engineering, or just software developers? And it doesn't really matter because it's such a new space that everyone's kind of learning on the job. How are you kind of approaching hiring candidates to fulfill the kind of needs that you need as a business?
I think for us, it's just finding the 10x builders who are able to learn very quickly and pick up new technologies. And for us, I think that's the only thing we're looking for. But generally speaking, we want to hire smart people. So I mean, there are ways to find that out. But yeah, I don't think it's changed much. From a startup perspective, you want to find the folks who align with your vision, who are 10x builders, and who can learn quickly.
And I mean, with the influx in software developers just actually going into the space, do you think, what kind of barriers do you think they're facing? Do you think how do you think machine learning engineers are feeling that they're kind of, software engineers are cramping their style now?
Actually, I haven't spoken to that many ML specialists.
I mean,
yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's just great, actually, that there's so many people interested in jumping into it. It just gives, I think, all of us options. And from the ML engineer perspective, I mean, first of all, there's still like a bottleneck of people who can truly train large language models, but I don't think that's like anything in principle that's a bottleneck. It's just that you don't have a lot of places where you can gain that experience. You need a wealth of resources to be able to do it. But as OpenAI demonstrated, if you pair people who have extraordinary engineering abilities with people with deep theoretical backgrounds in math and physics, you can create that magic. So that should be replicable elsewhere if they do have enough resources.
Yeah, 100% agree. And Peter, from your side, I mean, Lisha kind of mentioned it a few times about fine tuning, and you guys mentioned that you do it a bit as well. How are you guys tackling the cost and performance of fine tuning a model? And how do you guys approach, when is it a good time to do it and when is it a good time just to kind of use a base model? Just because what we've seen is that clients don't really know the impact that a fine tuned model will have, and they also don't know maybe the best way to implement fine tuning. Use things like LoRa, deep speed, or things like that to actually improve training time. How are you guys approaching it at PromptLoop?
Yeah. So I guess to kind of talk about it at a higher level, we early on started using only open source models, and we're just looking at usage patterns. And obviously, if you're working in a spreadsheet on tabular data, by definition, even if you're batching your requests, you're going to have a much higher number of requests hitting a very big model than you would otherwise. So we had to think about the trade-off, I guess the IQ trade-off of parameters to speed earlier than otherwise, and have kind of found a sweet spot of the right size model that can accomplish most of users' needs without obviously running a $100+ billion parameter model. But I think that evolves. So for specific use cases, like we actually have the ability to offer customers their own smaller kind of BERT small LLM fine-tuned model for use cases that our base models aren't, even though they're fine-tuned, aren't doing a good enough job at. So in that case, again, they don't necessarily need to know the engineering behind the scenes. Most of them don't have ML teams in-house. So what we're offering them is the ability to get that. They can upload a CSV training set and get back their custom endpoint in a spreadsheet formula. But they want to know what's happening. And there's, I think, sophistication at every company where if you're just giving folks ChatGPT 3.5 or GPT-4, they understand that whatever the speed results cost they're getting is probably going to be the same as the business next door. So opportunities where you can deliver specific value. Some models obviously are much better at tolerance levels. That's proving to be pretty interesting to companies.
Yeah, and I feel like with all the research that's kind of coming out from lots of companies, especially Hugging Face, it's becoming easier and easier to train these large language models on kind of cheaper hardware. I think the one thing that a lot of companies have, at least I've been hearing, and you guys can tell me if you disagree, is companies are trying to move to like a hybrid cloud structure where they're trying to move GPUs kind of on-prem again and kind of remain with their kind of, I guess, databases and CPUs in the cloud just because of the cost. But I think as it gets cheaper and cheaper to fine-tune these models, it's, taking A100s to train something like Llama now, which is pretty fantastic. Just because I know we only got about 15 minutes left and there's a couple more questions I want to get to. I think it would be very interesting for everyone to talk about one unexpected use case that you had a client or customer go through that, they were interacting with your product in a way that you didn't think, like you and your team just didn't think about or experience. I think it would be great to kind of see like how users are kind of interacting with this technology and the implementation that you've been doing. So, Paul, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the first thing that caught us off guard was how popular it was to make YouTube videos with our tool. A lot of folks were talking about it's just ChatGPT in general is great for generating kind of content. So a lot of YouTubers are building apps on our platform, and I think one person built an entire website from scratch by telling easy code, hey, give me boilerplate code to write the front end and the back end, and then index that code base, and then build new features on top of that. And you can get pretty far with ChatGPT. So that was surprising to us to see that you can already build like a full stack web app with ChatGPT like technology.
Awesome. Leisha, how about you?
That's actually really good to hear, Paul. I mean, even just my own experience with like GPT-4, it was just like I think just like a very empowering feeling from creators. So I just like spent a weekend. I don't really know any front end, and I just learned Three.js, and then was able to get this like really fun web app out where people could use our API endpoint to create skyboxes and just like create immersive, kind of a feeling of an immersive world. So I can see why that's like so popular for people to like just make videos and share it. With us, I haven't, well, I guess like one thing that came to mind is more of like really interesting like community behavior. So I'll go back to one of the image stuff that we had, which was before even the diffusion models were super good. We trained a custom model on character faces that was actually quite, really good. And so we released it as a Discord bot in our community, and just people just started using it to like create these like not only characters, but backstories behind them. And there was just like a lot of engagement because people loved creating just new characters and have stories evolve. And I think just things like that really make me excited about the gaming use case, because it's not just about like, hey, helping developers go from like concept to game faster, but just like bringing in new people who can make games, because it's like you have this on demand, creative tool that can do so much more. You can do so much more as like one person.
Yeah, correct. I think also what this has kind of created is just more and more companies and startups, being teams of one, they can get off the ground and really test an MVP extremely quickly. I mean, I know we spoke about the moats, but I think we're seeing a lot more people dive into this realm of entrepreneurship, which is phenomenal. Lastly, Peter Bartley, what are some interesting use cases you guys have seen?
Yeah, I mean, as you might expect, we have a lot of different types of users and folks doing different things. I think one maybe more surprising earlier on is we had an ed tech company in Singapore that built out a pretty complex spreadsheet that they were using to generate really specific line by line, topic by topic. In this case, I think it was mostly ESL learning content. So they knew what they wanted. They were basically doing this in-house manually or buying it. Obviously at a pretty high cost from providers. So we didn't think of ourselves at all as enabling ed tech, but being able to do that in the beginning opened the aperture a little bit to how readily folks who know what they want with the right tools can obviously build towards. So that's a pretty interesting one. I know it's a huge space now. There's many startups growing quite quickly in that specific vertical.
Yeah, 100%. And I think kind of just touching on it, because we mentioned it like extremely early in the discussion, is with all these kind of this technology and it being new and how you're implementing it and giving your users freedom to create whatever they want. How are you, like, as different companies, managing the safety of what these platforms kind of generate? How much power are you giving to the end user? Like, what kind of safe guardrails have you put in place to kind of prevent that? Alicia, let's start with you.
Starting with me. Yeah, it's always hard. I don't think that I think for creators, it's actually kind of, you want to fight giving too many guardrails. It really kills creativity. And I think a lot of times it's like, there's also just like overblown, I mean, quite frankly, by the media about things that are unfair comparisons. So for instance, you can Google up things and there's like a lot of, you can like have a lot of violence appear in whatever you're, using your typical search engine, not powered by large language models. But if it comes out in a large language models, then it's like, oh no, but like on that topic, I mean, for us, it's mainly just trying to cultivate like a community of like just creators who want to create nice things. And I think just like a lot of other gaming platforms like Roblox, they managed to do it well by just kind of moderating poor behavior. But I don't want to like stifle too much of the creative energy.
Yeah, of course. And Paul, I'm sure with you, I mean, do you have any users who are trying to like hack people's Wi-Fi or hack bank accounts or create some malicious app code? How are you managing that?
No, I think we had some users who tried to hack our tool to get free access to. That was also unexpected use case of our own tool to figure out how to reverse engineer this. But I think I echo what Alicia said. Our positioning as a tool is to empower people to build. And if people want to use that to hack, I mean, there are ethical ways to hack, and there are bounty programs to do that as well. So we want to empower that. But at the same time, we have seen kind of just from a community sense, like how do you grow and manage a healthy community with creatives, and that has been a challenge for us. Our Discord channel grew very quickly, and we didn't have a lot of experience managing that Discord channel. So there was some offensive comments, and people started arguing about the pros and cons of AI or different tools. So we had to learn to manage that. But I think at the end of the day, it's a people issue. Like the tool at the end of the day is just a tool. So how do you build a culture around like healthy and ethical use of AI? I think is more important topic.
Yeah, 100%. I think the one use case that I think still exists today is just content moderation, even across social media websites. It's probably like something that's unsolved. We've had tons of users who've built models and built applications where we as a team internally are kind of don't know what the right action to take is on certain users. And we've kind of just been monitoring them closely. And, we kind of have no plan, I guess, going forward. Just kind of like, what do we as a team feel comfortable with kind of letting people create and use? But I mean, if anyone has any suggestions, please send it to me afterwards. And lastly, Peter, what about with you? What are you guys kind of doing to implement this?
Yeah, I mean, moderation obviously a hard problem. Even though we focus B2B, obviously we have in our behind either a Microsoft or Google account, we added in moderation pretty early. I think anyone who's opened up a tool like this to the internet sees or starts to see some activity that maybe isn't what they want to necessarily focus on. So there's that level. There's obviously thinking about businesses you want to work with and what type of activity it is. I mean, maybe companies have a part of the market of what these tools open up that they don't necessarily want to support. But I think all the points are right on. There's bad actors out there before. I'm sure there's gangs using Excel for the past decade. Like, all we're trying to do is just let the folks who have kind of legitimate businesses, exciting problems to work on, get access to the tools they can within like a parameter of safety.
Yeah. And I think just kind of to end off the discussion today, I think if everyone gives their 1 year from now prediction of kind of the technology, the market, where they kind of see the space going over the next year, I think it's moving so quickly that 1 year is probably the equivalent to the typical 5-year question. So Peter, how about we start with you? What's your 1 year prediction?
Yeah, I think in a year, the early adopter conversations that are typically that we're having right now are going to be much more commonplace, and there's going to be a basket of folks and maybe companies that are very privacy focused and start to maybe put at arm's length anything that isn't within their control, or will have strong opinions. And then appetite for new interfaces, I think, is going to continue to skyrocket from everyone now expecting and wanting chat in places where you wouldn't have dreamed of putting it last year. That's not going to slow down. I don't know if we've seen on the language side what that next interface is yet, but we're pretty excited for thinking about it.
Awesome. Paul, what about you?
I'm hoping to see that there will be more options when it comes to foundational models besides OpenAI as not the sole provider, but the main provider. And I'm hoping to see more open source projects come to life and actually productize as well. I think that will be healthy and beneficial for just the ecosystem at large.
Awesome. And lastly, Lisha, what are your predictions?
I mean, there's just so much uncertainty around it. I mean, obviously, I expect still to see tremendous improvements in the next version of GPT. Just maybe offering a little bit of a foil prediction against Paul's. I mean, I think other people are going to make powerful foundation models, but I feel like because there's a lead and because they do have a bit of a data flywheel advantage, the next version, you're building a machine that can build machines, and that really amplifies the delta. So a lot of uncertainty around that, but I just expect that, especially the code generation aspect of it, to continue to surprise us. And hopefully, as founders, we can just push that towards more delightful experiences.
Yeah. I think the one thing I would say that we're kind of thinking, and whether it's true or not, is like a disintermediation. I think everyone's using OpenAI now, but I think as more and more people are building on it, and the better that these open source models are actually getting, and the easier it's getting to fine tune them. And companies are already coming out with the results of these fine tuned models. With latency being a lot lower and performance being comparable for their specific task, we're going to see a lot more, in-house kind of models where it's kind of fine tuned on proprietary data. Two, I think the open source movement is going to continue to kind of carry this forward, at least a little bit more than just OpenAI itself. I think it's going to lead to some great products. But I think that's kind of like our time for today. Everyone, I want to thank you so much for your time. It was a great conversation and great chatting to you. I hope our audience got value, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. Cheers, everyone.